Consider the meeting you are preparing for, the calibration session, the promotion committee, the review in which your name is finally weighed against the names of your peers. You have assembled the case, the metrics, the delivered mandates, the quarters closed under structural constraint. You believe this is the room where the decision is made.
It is not. It is the room where a decision already reached is read into the record. The unease you have carried, the sense that certain outcomes arrive preloaded, that some names move with an inevitability yours has never possessed, is not insecurity. It is accurate perception of a system no one described to you. The performance review is not the trial, it is the sentencing. And by the time you enter it to plead, the verdict has been settled law for months. This is the central misallocation of the high performer's career. You have optimized the visible window, the appraisal, the deliverable, the moment of formal assessment, on the assumption that the institution evaluates output at the point of decision. It does not. It ratifies a consensus assembled long beforehand, in conversations you were never party to, by people whose judgment had already hardened before your evidence existed. There is a corporate asymmetry at work here, and it is total. You experience the promotion as an event. The people deciding it experience it as the closing entry on a process that has been running for over a year. You prepared an argument. The market had already cleared. What follows is the structure of that settlement layer, where elevation is actually transacted, why competence is systematically the wrong instrument to bring to it, and the named countermeasure that relocates your effort to the only period where the decision is genuinely live. The mechanism is not modern. It is one of the oldest structures in the record of organized power, and 3 traditions expose it with unusual clarity. When Achilles fell, his armor, divine, irreplaceable, the single most valuable asset in the Greek camp, was not awarded by combat. It was allocated by vote of the command. Ajax was the superior warrior. No one disputed this, least of all Ajax. The arms went instead to Odysseus, whose advantage lay entirely elsewhere. In the case he had been constructing, quietly and continuously within the councils of the leadership, long before the award was ever convened. Ajax optimized the battlefield. Odysseus optimized the room. In doing so, Ajax made the fatal error of assuming the contest measured soldiering. It measured the case made on his behalf, and Odysseus had been making his for years. The second tradition states the principle as a choice. On the eve of the war at Kurukshetra, 2 rival commanders approached the same figure, Krishna, and were each offered a selection, his standing armies or his unarmed personal council. Duryodhana, optimizing for visible resource, took the divisions. Arjuna took the advisor, the validator who would lift no weapon, but who would occupy the exact center of the decision, read the field, and lend his authority to Arjuna's cause at the moment it carried weight. Functionally, the engagement was settled in that selection, not on the plane that followed. One side acquired raw capacity. The other acquired the most powerful absentee advocate available, positioned precisely where outcomes are confirmed. Centuries later, the same mechanism simply wore court dress. At Versailles, advancement was transacted at the king's morning levee, among the few permitted to attend his waking. The formal appointment that followed was administrative residue. In the Ottoman palace, high office was brokered in the inner chambers, among favorites and validators, well before any public investiture. The throne room sealed agreements struck in the antechamber. The costume changes across cultures and centuries. The structure does not. Power is allocated in private, among a small set of validators, and then performed in public as though the performance were the cause. Strip the costume away and the modern mechanism is precise. A promotion is the output of accumulated sponsorship traffic, the volume and seniority of people who advocate for your name when you are not in the room, combined with reputation signals socialized across the deciding body over a window of roughly 6 to 18 months. The calibration meeting does not generate this consensus. It discovers it already formed. This produces a systemic exposure most high performers never price. You can run the diagnostics yourself, and they are uncomfortable. First, when you are absent from a discussion of talent, is your name raised by someone other than yourself? Second, does anyone with structural power stand to lose something? Credibility, a resource, a commitment they have made if you are passed over? Third, has your name been spoken, favorably and specifically, in at least one room you were not permitted to enter? If you cannot answer yes to these, you do not have a performance problem. You have an advocacy vacuum, and no quantity of output will fill it at the point of decision. This vacuum exists because most performers treat reputation as a vague atmosphere. In reality, reputation is a physical trail of socialization. It is the residue of your name left in an antechamber after you exited. Within the 18 months preceding a verdict, your name undergoes a process of institutional normalization. When a high-ranking validator mentions your candidacy in a casual setting, a hallway, a pre-meeting buffer, a flight, they are not making a decision. They are performing a soft anchor. They are testing the room's resistance to your elevation. If the room remains silent, the lack of velocity is logged as passive resistance. The validator notes that your name carries no currency. If the room nods, the normalization deepens. By the time the formal calibration meeting occurs, the deciding body has already sampled your promotion dozens of times. The formal vote is merely the final confirmation of a habit. The tragedy of the unsponsored high performer is that their name is never sampled. It arrives in the room as a cold variable. And in a high-stakes institution, cold is synonymous with risky. The board does not reject your results. They reject the suddenness of your candidacy. Left to run uncorrected, this dynamic produces two distinct structural failures. The first is the transactional blind spot. A director delivers the strongest numbers in her function: measurable, defensible, unarguable. In calibration, her name surfaces and her manager offers a competent generic endorsement. A peer with weaker results is championed by a vice president who has, across 2 quarters, repeatedly attached that peer's name to a strategic priority of his own. The peer is promoted. The committee did not err. It rationally weighted a sponsored, pre-socialized candidate over an unsponsored strong one. The numbers were real. They were simply not the variable under assessment. The second failure is structural rather than personal. An operator builds a single-sponsor relationship. Then a reorganization moves that sponsor out of the deciding body. His advocacy capital, concentrated in one node, evaporates overnight. He enters the cycle with a portfolio of 1, and the position is now empty. This is the accountability vacuum at its purest. The institution feels no obligation to a name no one in the room is invested in defending. The behavioral science explains why the room behaves this way and cannot easily behave otherwise. Decision makers do not enter calibration neutral. They arrive anchored, carrying a preformed candidate whose name was socialized into their judgment over the preceding months. Anchoring sets the reference point. Everything that follows is measured against it. Confirmation bias then governs the discussion itself. The so-called objective deliberation operates as a search for evidence that ratifies the anchor, not a genuine relitigation of it. The data you present is not weighed. It is filtered through a conclusion that already exists. This is not corruption. It is ordinary cognition operating under time pressure and social proof, which makes it far more durable than corruption, because no one in the room experiences themselves as biased. There is a quiet test running in every organization, not whether you are good. Whether you are spoken of well in rooms you will never enter. Most high performers pass the first test annually and fail the second without ever learning it existed. The countermeasure follows directly from the mechanism. If the decision is anchored before the meeting, then the only viable strategy is to become the anchor before the meeting. This is a discipline, not an instinct, and it has a structure. Call it the Antechamber Protocol. 3 sequential operations executed in the window where the decision is actually live. The first operation is room mapping. This requires identifying by name the individuals who will ratify the decision, not the formal lines of the org chart, but the actual set of human beings present and influential in the calibration of your level. Most professionals perform for an audience that does not hold the vote. The fatal execution error here is the org chart fallacy. Operators look for titles rather than mapping the sovereign validators. In every calibration, there is an individual who does not hold the highest rank, but whose silence or slight nod can kill a candidacy. This is the person the others look to for permission to agree. If you map the vice president but ignore the sovereign validator the vice president quietly defers to, your anchor will fail. The second operation is sponsor installation. A mentor advises you in private. A sponsor expends their own capital on you in public, in your absence. You require at least one genuine sponsor inside that mapped room. Someone with structural power who will voice your name when you are absent, and who has an operational reason of their own to do so. This installation carries a strict constraint: the advocacy tax. When a sponsor speaks for you in the antechamber, they are spending a finite currency of political credibility. If they advocate for your elevation and you underperform, they pay the tax. Therefore, your approach to a sponsor cannot be a request for assistance. It must be a demonstration of low-risk yield. You must prove that elevating you is the safest available way for them to protect or expand their own mandate. You are not asking them to take a risk. You are offering them a win that is already secured. You provide the ammunition. They provide the clearance to fire it. The third operation is consensus preloading. Across the 6 to 18-month window, your name must be socialized into the rooms you cannot enter until your candidacy reads as inevitable rather than argued. You are not lobbying for a verdict. You are installing the reference point against which every other candidate will be measured. This is structural arbitrage. You are exploiting the gap between when the institution believes it decides and when it actually decides. To see this protocol functional, consider a director 14 months ahead of an executive cycle. Having mapped her calibration panel, she identifies a single vice president whose strategic mandate her team's work directly advances. She does not engage in transparent lobbying or bypass her immediate line, a move that would trigger defensive alignment against her. Instead, she systematically steers her team's output to make that vice president's specific priorities measurably more successful. She makes this contribution legible to her manager first, then ensures that visibility radiates upward, giving the vice president a self-interested reason to attach her name to outcomes he is personally accountable for. Over the following quarters, her name enters adjacent forums in his voice, not hers. By the time the panel convenes, she is not a candidate being evaluated. She is the consensus being confirmed. The meeting, for her, is administrative residue. Contrast the operator who saves his case for the review itself. The professional who waits for the review to make his case has prepared a meticulous defense for a verdict entered into the record last quarter. Thoroughness, deployed precisely too late, is indistinguishable from negligence. None of this is an argument against competence. Competence remains the precondition. It is what makes you sponsorable at all. But competence is the entry fee, not the transaction. The transaction is advocacy, conducted in advance in rooms you will never see, which exposes the next fault line, and it is the one that ends careers quietly. The entire protocol rests on a distinction most professionals never draw with precision: the difference between the mentor and the sponsor. They are not adjacent points on a spectrum. They are different instruments. They cost the other party entirely different things, and the person who confuses the two will spend years cultivating relationships that feel valuable and produce nothing at the moment of decision. The mentor improves you. The sponsor spends on you. Knowing which one you actually have and which one you have been mistaking for the other is the difference between being prepared and being promoted. That distinction is the subject of what comes next.